The council chamber stretched out like a cathedral of glass and metal, floating in the empty space above a planet that nobody owned. Daniel Grant walked through the massive doors and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. The air tasted strange, filtered through systems designed for a dozen different species who breathed different things and called different worlds home. Ambassador Grant had been to this chamber 3 times before, but today felt different. The usual diplomatic chatter had stopped when he entered. Even the translation devices seemed quieter than normal. Colonel Lisa Monroe walked 2 steps behind him, her military uniform crisp and perfect. She had warned him this morning that something was coming. 20 years in the service had given her an instinct for danger that Daniel had learned to trust. Richards completed their small group. They carried a data pad and wore the expression of someone who had already read too many bad reports. Daniel had asked him to research the council's history. Whatever had found, it had kept him awake for 3 nights straight. The council members sat in their designated sections, arranged by species and power. They occupied the highest platform, their insect bodies gleaming under the lights. High Chancellor clicked his mandibles together in what passed for a smile among his kind. The sound echoed through the chamber like breaking glass. Below the sat their reptilian forms wrapped in what looked like ceremonial armor, but was actually their own scaled skin. General stood instead of sitting, his clawed hands resting on the weapons that his species never removed. They had conquered 40 worlds before joining the council. They had strong opinions about military strength and no patience for weakness. They watched from their section with eyes that saw too much. Their telepathic abilities were limited, or so they claimed, but Daniel always felt exposed when Ambassador looked at him. She sat perfectly still, her pale skin almost glowing in the dim light. Theon filled out the remaining council seats. The amphibious kept meticulous records of every decision made in the last 3,000 years. The silicon-based processed information faster than any computer humanity had ever built. Younger species filled the outer rings of the chamber. The ambassador, a woman named, caught Daniel's eye and looked away quickly. Her people had joined the council 40 years ago. Something in her expression reminded Daniel of a prisoner who had stopped fighting her chains. High Chancellor rose from his seat with the fluid grace of a predator. His voice came through the translation system smooth and confident. Ambassador Grant, we welcome humanity to this gathering. Today we discuss matters of great importance to all civilized species. Daniel nodded and took his place at the human section. The chair had been built for a different body shape, but he managed. Lisa stood behind him, hands clasped behind her back, activated his data pad and prepared to record. The Galactic Council has maintained peace and prosperity for 10,000 years, continued. His mandibles clicked with each word, adding a rhythm to his speech. This peace requires sacrifice from all who benefit from it. It requires contribution. It requires tribute. The word hung in the air like a blade. All species under council protection participate in the tribute system. It is the foundation of our civilization. It ensures that resources flow where they are needed. It guarantees that military strength protects the weak. It maintains the order that allows commerce and culture to flourish. Daniel listened without interrupting. He had learned that the council valued ceremony and patience. Rushing through formalities was considered barbaric. Gestured with one of his limbs, and a display appeared in the center of the chamber. Numbers and charts floated in the air, complex enough that it would take hours to fully understand them. Humanity has been a member of this council for 15 cycles. In that time, you have proven yourselves capable. Your worlds are rich in resources. Your manufacturing capabilities are impressive. Your population is young and strong. It is time for humanity to join the tribute system and take your full place among civilized species. The display changed, showing Earth and the human colonies. Red markers appeared over major industrial centers, mining operations, and population hubs. The Council requires the following from humanity. 70% of your manufacturing output will be directed to Council projects. Access to rare earth minerals from your will be granted to Council mining corporations. 50,000 humans will be conscripted for service in Council military forces. These contributions will be provided annually, beginning 6 months from today. Daniel felt Lisa's hand tighten on the back of his chair, stopped recording and looked up, his face blank with shock. These terms are non-negotiable, continued. They have been calculated based on humanity's capacity and population. Other species contribute according to similar formulas, that provide agricultural products, the supply technological research, the maintain mining operations in the outer sectors. All contribute, all benefit. Daniel raised his hand and paused. The chamber fell silent. May I ask for clarification on several points? Of course, Ambassador Grant, the Council values understanding. The 50,000 humans conscripted for military service. What would their terms of service be? Standard Council military contracts, 20-year terms renewable at Council discretion. They would be assigned where needed. And if they refuse? His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Refusal is not an option. This is tribute, not a job offer. The soldiers would be selected by lottery from your population. Leaned forward and whispered something to Daniel. Daniel nodded and asked his next question. The 70% of manufacturing output, does that include military production? General spoke for the first time, his voice like grinding stones. Especially military production. Junior species do not need extensive military capabilities. The Council provides protection. I see, Daniel kept his voice neutral. And the rare earth minerals, which specific elements are we discussing? Listed them? The list included nearly every strategic resource that made modern technology possible. Giving the Council access to those minerals would mean giving them control over humanity's industrial future. How long do we have to provide a formal response? Daniel asked. 1 standard month. The Council will reconvene at that time to receive humanity's acceptance and begin the transition process. And if humanity needs more time to consider? The chamber grew colder. High Chancellor leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the lights into 100 fragments. Ambassador Grant, this is not a negotiation. This is an announcement of policy. Every species in this chamber has accepted these terms. The tribute system has maintained galactic peace for 10. Humanity will not be an exception. Daniel looked around the chamber at the other junior species. Some looked sympathetic, most looked resigned. Of the stared at her hands. I understand the Council's position, Daniel said carefully. I request permission to consult with my government before providing humanity's formal response. Settled back into his seat. Granted, 1 month, Ambassador Grant, we expect your cooperation and compliance. This session is concluded. The Council members began to file out. Daniel remained seated for a moment, processing what had just happened. Lisa leaned down and spoke quietly. They actually think we'll agree to this. Gathered his data pad. Every species in this room agreed to it, or was forced to. Daniel stood and straightened his jacket. Contact Earth. Direct line to President Carter. Tell her we need to talk immediately. As they walked out of the chamber, Daniel caught watching him with what looked like satisfaction. The High Chancellor had delivered his ultimatum and expected submission. He had done this 100 times before to 100 different species. But High Chancellor had never demanded tribute from humans before. He had never tried to take what humanity had built with their own hands. He had never asked Earth to choose between freedom and survival. Daniel wondered if would have been so confident if he had studied human history more carefully. If he had learned what happened to empires that demanded submission from people who valued freedom more than life itself. The month ahead would teach the Galactic Council a lesson they would never forget. It would start with a single word. A simple word, a word that would change everything. But that word would have to wait for the formal response session. For now, Daniel had to make sure Earth understood exactly what was being asked of them and exactly what refusing would cost. The doors closed behind the human delegation. In the empty chamber, the lights dimmed automatically. The Council had made its demands. Now it waited for the inevitable acceptance. It would be a long wait. President Helen Carter looked at the report for the 3rd time, and it still made her angry. She sat in her office in Geneva, where the unified Earth government had made its home 30 years ago. Outside her window, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun, beautiful and peaceful, for now. They want 70% of everything we make, she said quietly, and 50,000 of our people as soldiers. Admiral Shaw stood by the wall, his arms crossed. He had commanded Earth's 3rd Fleet for 8 years and had fought in the border skirmishes against pirates and raiders. He knew what war looked like. It's slavery dressed up with fancy words, he said. Tribute, protection, contribution, call it what you want, it's still taking our freedom. Helen nodded. Daniel says every other species accepted similar terms. Some of them fought first and lost, others just surrendered. How long ago was the last species that refused? 800 years. According to research, the Council sent 6 battle fleets to there, took 3 weeks to break them. Their planet is a mining colony now. Moved to the window and looked out at the city. We have maybe 40 fleets total if we count everything, including the old ships we keep in reserve. Council military is at least 10 times that size. So we can't win. Not in a straight fight, not if they commit everything. He turned back to face her. But the question isn't whether we can win, the question is whether we're willing to lose. Helen understood what he meant. Earth could refuse and fight and probably die. Or Earth could accept and live as subjects to an empire that would control their future forever. Call the cabinet, she said, and get me the military chiefs, all of them. We have a month to decide what humanity is going to be. Across human space, the response began quietly. Orders went out through encrypted channels. Military units moved into new positions without explanation. Factory managers received new production schedules and asked no questions. Commander Barnes commanded the defense forces at Arcadia Station, one of humanity's largest colonies. She received her orders 3 days after the Council made its demands. The message was simple and clear. Prepare for evacuation. Prepare for attack. Prepare for the worst. Called her senior officers together in the station's command center. The space was cramped and functional, built by humans who believed in efficiency over comfort. I'm not going to lie to you, she told them. We might be at war soon, real war, not border skirmishes. The Council wants us to bow, and Earth is considering telling them no. One of the younger officers, a lieutenant named Chris Boyd, raised his hand. What are our chances if they attack? Alone, none. We evacuate civilians and hold the line long enough for the fleet to arrive, if the fleet arrives. And if we surrender? Looked at him for a long moment. Then we spend the rest of our lives watching while they strip everything we built and take our children for soldiers. You tell me which option sounds better. The room fell silent. Nobody had a good answer because there was no good answer. On Earth, the government worked around the clock. Helen met with representatives from every nation, every major corporation, every military command. The question was always the same. Can we fight? Should we fight? What happens if we lose? Admiral Shaw presented his analysis to the Joint Military Committee. He stood in front of a holographic display showing human space and Council territory. If they commit to destroying us, we lose, he said bluntly. We're outnumbered and most of our colonies are indefensible, but there are factors the Council might not be considering. He highlighted several points on the map. We can make it expensive, really expensive. Every human colony has been fortified. Every civilian can be evacuated ahead of time. We can fight a war where every engagement costs them more than they expect. One of the generals leaned forward. You're talking about a war of attrition, making them bleed for every inch. I'm talking about making them question whether conquering us is worth the cost. The Council maintains peace across 1,000 worlds. They need their military for that. If we tie up their forces here, fighting a species that won't quit, other parts of their empire might get ideas. Another voice spoke up. That's assuming we can last long enough to matter, the fought for 3 weeks. Nodded, though we're trying to win. We just need to survive and make them regret starting the fight. While Earth debated, the Council watched and waited. High Chancellor met with his advisors in his private chambers. The rooms were built to accommodate his insect physiology, with walls that curved and supports that allowed for climbing. Any word from the humans? He asked. His chief aide, a younger named, checked the reports. Nothing official. They acknowledged receiving the terms, since then silence. Are they preparing their resource shipments? Our intelligence reports unusual activity, military movements, civilian transports being chartered, construction projects starting on several worlds. Clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. They're preparing to comply, moving resources, preparing facilities for Council oversight, as expected. General disagreed. The warrior had joined the meeting uninvited, as was his habit. I think they're preparing for war. Based on what evidence? based on the fact that every movement they're making looks like military preparation. Civilians being moved away from border colonies, fleets repositioning into defensive formations, construction that looks more like fortifications than warehouses. Waved a limb dismissively. They're a young species trying to appear strong before negotiations. They want better terms, will offer minor concessions they'll accept, and the matter will be settled. And if they refuse, then we teach them the same lesson we taught it won't take long. But not everyone in the council was so confident. Ambassador of the requested a private meeting with. She arrived at his chambers alone, her telepathic senses reaching out carefully. "You wanted to speak with me?" asked. "I have concerns about humanity." "They'll accept the terms, they always do." Shook her head slowly. "During the session, I sensed something in Ambassador Grant's mind, not thoughts exactly. We cannot read specific thoughts, but emotions, patterns. What I sense troubles me." "What did you sense?" "No fear, or rather, fear of the wrong things. He wasn't afraid of war or death. He was afraid of submission." Considered this. Perhaps he's simply brave. "It's not bravery, it's something else. I've sensed this pattern before in species we've subjugated. The difference is that in those species, the feeling faded as we conquered them. In the human ambassador, it was absolute, complete, as if submission was literally worse than death. One individual's feelings do not represent an entire species. I reached out to the other humans with him, the soldier and the diplomat. I felt the same pattern in both of them. Whatever their government decides, the humans I touched would rather die than accept tribute." Turned away from her. "Then it's fortunate for them that their government will be more reasonable. Death serves no one." Across the galaxy, other species watched humanity's choice with great interest. The ambassador followed the news carefully. She remembered when her own people faced this decision 40 years ago. They had been proud once. They had refused the council's first tribute demand. They had fought for 6 months before accepting that they could not win. The terms offered after their defeat had been much harsher than the original demand. Wondered if the humans knew that refusing meant worse terms if they eventually surrendered. She wondered if they cared. Her daughter, a young woman named, came into her study carrying news feeds from across the galaxy. "Everyone's talking about the humans. Do you think they'll fight?" "I don't know." "What would you do if you were human?" Looked at her daughter for a long moment. "I would do what we should have done. I would say no." "But we lost when we fought." "Yes, and we lost something much more important when we surrendered. We lost ourselves." The days passed slowly. Earth made its preparations in silence. The council waited with growing impatience. Other species whispered and wondered. 2 days before the deadline, Daniel received a message from President Carter. It was brief and direct. "Come home, Ambassador Grant. We have our answer." Daniel, Lisa, and boarded a human transport and left the council station. As they departed, they passed 3 battle fleets moving into position near human space. General was taking no chances. On the transport, Lisa asked the question that had been bothering her all month. "Do you know what Earth decided?" Daniel nodded. "The president told me during our last call." "And?" "We're going to tell them no." Looked up from his data pad, his face pale. "They'll attack us, you know that, right? 3 weeks after we refuse, Earth could be burning." "I know." "Then why?" Daniel stared out the window at the stars streaming past. Because the president asked herself a question. She asked, what kind of species do we want to be? The kind that bows when threatened, or the kind that stands up even when standing up means dying? That's easy to say when you're not the one fighting. That's why I volunteered to deliver the answer in person. I'm going to stand in front of the council and tell them no. If they attack, I'll be one of the first to die. Seems only fair. Lisa smiled despite herself. "You're crazy, Ambassador." "Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy and free than sane and enslaved." The transport jumped to faster than light speed, carrying the human delegation back to Earth. Behind them, the council prepared for what they assumed would be humanity's acceptance. They prepared celebration ceremonies. They drafted documents for resource transfers. They assigned council overseers to human worlds. They did everything except prepare for the one thing that was actually coming. They did not prepare for the word that would change everything. the word that would shake the foundation of 10,000 years of galactic order. They did not prepare for humanity to choose death over submission. In 1 month, the galaxy would learn what humans were truly capable of. Not their technology or military strength, but something more fundamental. Their absolute refusal to bow. The council chamber looked different than it had a month ago. More cameras, more observers, more representatives from species across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to witness humanity's formal acceptance of tribute. It would be recorded in the historical archives as another successful integration into the galactic order. High Chancellor sat in his elevated position, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. He had spent the morning receiving congratulations from other council members. The human tribute would fund 3 new exploration initiatives and strengthen council military forces. Everything was proceeding perfectly. General stood nearby, his scaled hands resting on his weapons as always. He had positioned 3 battle fleets near human colonies just outside neutral space. A precaution, he called it. Insurance that humanity would make the right choice. Ambassador of the sat in her section, her telepathic senses reaching out across the chamber. Something felt wrong, but she could not identify what. The emotional patterns in the room were celebratory, confident, satisfied, but underneath she sensed something else, a current of tension that made no sense. The younger species filled their sections quietly. Ambassador of the watched the doors with an expression caught between hope and dread. She had sent a private message to Ambassador Grant 3 days ago, begging him to accept the terms. She had received no reply. The chamber fell silent as the doors opened. Daniel Grant entered alone. He carried nothing, no data pad with official documents, no gifts that typically accompanied formal acceptance ceremonies, no attendants or advisors. He wore a simple suit, dark and formal, and walked with steady steps toward the human section. The observers noticed immediately. Whispers spread through the chamber like ripples on water. Where were the resource manifests? Where were the contracts for the conscripted soldiers? Where were the mining rights documents? Noticed but dismissed it as theater. Humans liked their dramatic presentations. Grant probably planned to deliver everything verbally before transmitting the official documents. Daniel reached his position and stood quietly. He did not sit. His hands remained at his sides, relaxed but ready. High Chancellor rose from his seat and spread his limbs in a gesture of welcome. Ambassador Grant, we gather here to receive humanity's formal acceptance of Council tribute requirements. This is a momentous occasion, marking Earth's full integration into galactic civilization. The translation devices carried words across the chamber in 100 different languages and formats. The terms were clearly stated 1 month ago. 70% of human manufacturing output, access to Earth's rare minerals, 50,000 humans for Council military service, annual tribute beginning 6 months from today. Does humanity accept these terms? The chamber held its breath, cameras focused on the human ambassador. This moment would be broadcast across the galaxy, showing once again that the Council's authority was absolute. Daniel looked up at High Chancellor. He looked at General. He looked around the chamber at all the species who had accepted similar terms, who had bent their necks and bowed their heads. Then he spoke. His voice was clear and carried through the perfect acoustics of the chamber. No. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The word hung in the air like a physical object, impossible and real at the same time. High Chancellor's mandibles froze mid-click. I'm sorry, Ambassador Grant. I don't think the translation system functioned correctly. Could you repeat your response? Daniel's voice remained steady. No, humanity declines the tribute demand. We will not comply. The chamber erupted, not in sound, not yet, but in movement. Council members turned to each other. Observers leaned forward. The cameras zoomed in on Daniel's face, searching for any sign that this was a joke or a misunderstanding. It was not. His voice lost its smooth, diplomatic tone. Ambassador Grant, perhaps you misunderstand the nature of this proceeding. This is not a negotiation. This is a formal acceptance ceremony. The tribute system is not optional. Then I formally decline a system that is not optional. General stepped forward, his presence filling the space like a physical threat. His voice came out like grinding rocks. You dare refuse the Council? Do you know what happened to the last species that spoke such words? Daniel turned to face the warrior directly. They're burned 800 years ago. Your forces took 3 weeks to break them. I've read the reports. Then you know what waits for your people if you persist in this foolishness. I know exactly what waits. Earth understands that refusing tribute is a declaration of war. We accept that reality. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Ambassador leaned forward, her telepathic senses focused entirely on the human. What she felt made her gasp. Not bravado, not false courage. Absolute certainty, absolute acceptance. Daniel Grant had walked into this chamber knowing he might die today, and he had come anyway. High Chancellor tried to regain control of the situation. Ambassador Grant, I urge you to reconsider. Think of your people, think of your... The Council has maintained order for 10,000 years. Resistance is both futile and unnecessary. Accept the terms, and humanity will prosper under Council protection. The Council doesn't protect. The Council controls. There's a difference. A difference that hardly matters when your colonies are under attack. Daniel smiled, and something in that smile made several Council members shift uncomfortably. You're right, High Chancellor. Once the shooting starts, the difference between protection and control stops mattering. But there's another difference that will matter a great deal. What difference is that? The difference between a species that will accept slavery and a species that won't. The difference between people who give up when threatened and people who fight back. The difference between subjects and citizens. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his species. These are just words, Ambassador Grant, empty philosophy. The reality is simple. The Council has the military strength to enforce its will. Humanity is one species against an empire of hundreds. You cannot win this fight. You're probably right, but we're going to fight anyway. Why, what possible logic drives such a suicidal decision? Daniel took a breath before answering. Because throughout human history, every empire that ever existed believed it could force submission through superior strength. Every tyrant thought fear was enough to make people obey. And throughout human history, some people always chose death over submission. Sometimes they lost, often they lost, but they never stopped choosing. He gestured around the chamber at the other species. Everyone here accepted your terms. Some fought first and were crushed. Others submitted immediately. All of them made what you consider the logical choice. Survival over freedom, peace over dignity, life over independence. And you consider that choice wrong. I consider it a choice each species must make for themselves. The chose to accept, the chose to fight and lost. Humanity is making our choice now, and our choice is no. Not negotiation, not better terms, just no. Ambassador of the spoke up, her voice desperate. Ambassador Grant, please, I watched my people fight and lose. I watched our worlds burn before we surrendered. The cost of resistance is terrible. Save your people that suffering, accept the terms. Daniel looked at her with something like sympathy. Ambassador, I mean no disrespect to your people's choice. But humanity has different values. We've fought wars where we lost 90% of our population and still didn't surrender. We've faced extinction and chosen to keep fighting anyway. It's not bravery. It's not logic. It's just who we are. General's patience finally broke. Then your species is insane. My fleets are positioned near your colonies. I can give the order to attack right now. Thousands of your people will die within hours. I know, and Earth's fleets are positioned to meet yours. When you attack, we'll fight back. We'll lose eventually. But we'll make you pay for every meter of space, every colony, every ship. And when you finally reach Earth itself, you'll find 6 billion humans who would rather die than kneel. The chamber fell absolutely silent, even seemed taken aback by the certainty in Daniel's voice. High Chancellor played his final card. You speak with confidence, Ambassador Grant, but you are just one person. Your government sent you here to negotiate, not to start a war. I'm sure if I contact President Carter directly, we can reach a more reasonable understanding. Actually, the President asked me to deliver a message if you suggested that. Daniel's voice took on a formal tone. President Helen Carter of the United Earth Government sends her regards to the Galactic Council. She wants you to know that Ambassador Grant speaks with the full authority of humanity. His words are her words. His decision is our decision. And she wants to be very clear about one thing. What thing? If you want tribute from humanity, you're going to have to come and take it. And we'll kill every one of you we can in the process. The words landed like bombs. Council members looked at each other in shock. This was not how these ceremonies went. Species didn't refuse. They didn't threaten. They certainly didn't declare their intention to fight back. Ambassador suddenly stood, her telepathic senses overwhelmed. "High Chancellor, I must speak." "Not now, Ambassador." Now, her voice carried an authority that made even pause. "I sensed the human delegation when they first came before us. I warned you then that something was different about them. Now I understand what I was sensing." "What did you sense?" "Complete commitment. Ambassador Grant is not bluffing. President Carter is not posturing. Humanity has made its choice, and that choice is absolute. If you demand tribute, they will fight. If you attack, they will resist. If you conquer their colonies, they will fight on. If you destroy their fleets, they will rebuild and fight again. And they will never, ever submit." Turned back to Daniel. "Is this true?" "Every word. We're done talking, High Chancellor. You made your demand. I gave you humanity's answer. What happens next is entirely up to you." Daniel turned toward the doors. High Chancellor's voice stopped him. "If you leave this chamber, Ambassador Grant, it is an act of war." Daniel looked back over his shoulder. "No, High Chancellor, demanding tribute was an act of war. I'm just acknowledging the reality you created." He walked toward the doors. Every eye in the chamber followed him. General moved as if to block his path, but Ambassador's voice stopped him. "Let him go." "Why?" "Because if you touch him, the war starts right here, right now in this chamber. And I think we all need time to understand what just happened." Daniel reached the doors. Before exiting, he turned one last time to address the council. "For 10,000 years, you've maintained order by making species choose between submission and death. You assumed everyone would choose submission because the alternative was too terrible. But some species don't see it that way. Some of us think submission is worse than death. And you're about to learn what happens when you threaten people who genuinely believe that." The doors closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the silent chamber. For several moments, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The council chamber, which had witnessed 10,000 years of peaceful submission, had just seen something it had never encountered before. Absolute refusal. Then the emergency sirens started. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human fleets were moving. Civilian transports were evacuating colonies. Fortifications were activating. Humanity had chosen war. And the Galactic Council, for the first time in 10,000 years, felt the cold touch of fear. General gave the order 6 hours after Daniel Grant walked out of the council chamber. His 3 battle fleets advanced on human colonies with overwhelming force. 200 ships per fleet, veteran crews, weapons tested in 100 previous conquests. The targets were simple. New Terra, a farming colony. Arcadia Station, a manufacturing hub. Epsilon Mining Complex, rich in rare minerals. The general expected frightened colonists and minimal resistance. He expected surrender within hours. He expected tribute collection to begin within days. What he found instead changed everything. Admiral Shaw waited in high orbit above New Terra. His third fleet hung in space like a steel constellation, 300 ships arranged in defensive formation. Every weapon system was active. Every shield was charged. Every crew member knew what was coming. The fleet emerged from faster than light travel and stopped when they saw what waited for them. "That's not possible," the fleet commander said. "Intelligence reported minimal defenses, maybe 40 ships." His sensor officer rechecked the readings. "Sir, I'm counting 300 human vessels, all combat-ready, all positioned for engagement." The commander opened a communication channel to Admiral Shaw. "Human fleet, you are ordered to stand down and surrender. Resistance will be met with total destruction." Shaw's response came back immediately. "Fleet, you are ordered to withdraw from human space. You have 10 minutes to comply." "You cannot possibly believe you can defeat us." "I don't need to defeat you. I just need to make you pay for being here." The commander cut the channel and reported to General. "Admiral, the humans are refusing to surrender. Their fleet is larger than expected." "How much larger?" 7 times larger than intelligence predicted." Felt the first stirring of unease. "Battle formation, advance and destroy them." The fleet moved forward. The human fleet moved to intercept. The two forces met in the space between New Terra and its nearest moon. The battle began with long-range weapons fire. Missiles and energy beams crossed the darkness. They had superior technology, weapons that had crushed a dozen species. But the humans had something else. They had numbers, they had position, and they had absolute commitment. Admiral Shaw watched the tactical display from his flagship. All ships execute pattern Delta, target their capital ships, ignore casualties, keep firing. A young officer looked up from her station. Admiral, we're taking heavy losses on the left flank. How heavy? 12 ships destroyed, 8 more heavily damaged. And their losses? 4 capital ships damaged, 2 destroyed. Shaw nodded. Good trade, keep the pressure on. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships that lost shields didn't retreat. They pressed forward, launching every weapon they had before being destroyed. Damaged vessels that couldn't maneuver became stationary gun platforms, firing until their power cores failed. And when conventional weapons ran out, some ships did something they had never seen before. They rammed. The first ramming happened almost by accident. A human cruiser lost its engines during a close pass with a battleship. Instead of drifting helplessly, the captain diverted all remaining power to thrusters and steered directly into the enemy vessel. Both ships exploded in a burst of light that temporarily blinded nearby sensors. 5 more human ships followed that example. Crippled and dying, their captains chose to take enemies with them rather than float waiting for destruction. General watched the battle reports with growing fury. They're insane. Ships don't ram enemy vessels. That's suicide. His aide, a younger warrior, looked pale. Sir, they're not trying to survive. They're trying to make us pay the highest price possible. Then we'll make them pay more. Order the second and third fleets to advance. Crush them with superior numbers. But something was happening at Arcadia Station, an Epsilon mining complex. Similar stories played out at both locations. Human defenders that fought beyond logic. Colonial stations rigged to explode rather than be captured. Civilians already evacuated, leaving soldiers free to fight without worrying about protecting non-combatants. Commander Barnes stood in Arcadia Station's command center watching the fleet approach. Her defense force was smaller than Admiral Shaw's fleet. Maybe 50 ships and the station's fixed weapons. Not enough to win, more than enough to hurt them. All civilians are off station, her executive officer reported. The transports jumped to faster than light speed 15 minutes ago. Nodded. Good, now we can fight properly. All ships engage at will. Station weapons full power and activate the self-destruct charges. Self-destruct. If they want this station, they'll have to rebuild it from scratch. We're not giving them anything useful. The fleet that attacked Arcadia expected an easy victory. They found defenders who used the station itself as a weapon. Human ships lured enemy vessels into the station's firing arcs. Defense platforms that should have conserved ammunition for long sieges dumped everything they had in the first hour. And when boarding parties finally fought their way onto the station, they found empty corridors rigged with explosives. The defenders had withdrawn to their ships, and the station's computer counted down to detonation. Commander Barnes watched from her flagship as Arcadia Station exploded. The blast caught 17 ships that had moved too close. Some were destroyed outright, others spun away, damaged and burning. Her communications officer looked sick. Ma'am, we just destroyed our own station. Better us than them, now they have nothing to show for this except casualties. She opened a channel to her fleet. All ships withdraw to Rally Point Gamma, will regroup and hit them again. News of the battles spread across the galaxy faster than light speed itself. The government watched in horror and admiration. When they had fought the Council, they tried to minimize casualties, hoping to negotiate a peace. Humanity was doing the opposite. Every engagement was total. Every loss inflicted maximum damage on the enemy. Ambassador sat in her office watching the reports. Her daughter stood beside her, reading casualty numbers aloud. Human losses are terrible. 40 ships destroyed at New Terra, 28 at Arcadia, 15 at Epsilon. And Council losses. 16 capital ships destroyed, 34 damaged, unknown casualties, but estimates suggest thousands dead. Felt tears on her face. They're losing every battle and still fighting. Why, they could surrender now. The Council would accept. Because they're proving something. They're showing the galaxy that humans don't surrender, ever. Stood and walked to her window. Below, young were gathering in the streets, watching the news feeds. Some held signs. Some chanted words hadn't heard in 40 years. They were asking why their own people had surrendered so easily. In the Galactic Council chamber, High Chancellor called an emergency session. Council members arrived to find General already presenting casualty reports. In the first week of operations, we have lost 20 capital ships and 43 support vessels. Human losses are higher, but not by the margin we expected. They're fighting with a ferocity that defies logic. Ambassador spoke up. I warned you about this. I sensed their commitment during the tribute session. They meant every word. His mandibles clicked rapidly with agitation. This is temporary insanity. Once they realize they cannot win, they will accept reasonable terms. They already know they cannot win. They don't care. Stood, her telepathic senses reaching out to the entire chamber. I've been monitoring human communication channels. Do you know what their soldiers say before battle? They say, for Earth and freedom. Not for victory, not for survival. Freedom. They would rather die free than live as our subjects. General slammed a clawed hand on his console. Then we'll give them death. I'm requesting 6 more battle fleets. We'll crush every colony, destroy every ship, and make an example of Earth itself. The representative, an amphibious being named Coordinator Shem, raised an objection. General, I've calculated the economic cost of your proposed campaign. 6 more battle fleets means diverting forces from border security, trade route protection, and peacekeeping operations. The financial burden alone could destabilize council economies. The cost of letting humanity defy us is higher. Is it? The representative, a silicon-based entity called Processing Unit 3, spoke for the first time. I have modeled 14,000 possible outcomes of continued conflict. In 87% of scenarios, prolonged war with humanity leads to instability among other tributary species. Turn to face the explain. 3 species are already showing signs of unrest. They have active protests demanding renegotiation of their tribute. They have submitted formal complaints. They have quietly increased their military production beyond treaty limits. If humanity successfully resists, or even just survives, the entire tribute system could collapse. Then we must destroy them quickly to prevent that outcome. Quick destruction is no longer possible. Human defensive tactics have proven more effective than projected. Current models suggest complete subjugation would require 18 months minimum and cost approximately 3,000 capital ships plus support vessels. The chamber fell silent. 3,000 ships was nearly a third of the Council's entire military force. The representative, ambassador, sent a telepathic pulse of urgency through the chamber. There is another option we're not considering. What option? Demanded. We could withdraw. We could admit that humanity is not worth the cost and leave them alone. Absolutely not. That would be seen as weakness. It would be seen as pragmatism. We demand tribute from species that can afford to pay it without threatening our stability. Humanity clearly cannot or will not comply. Continuing this war serves no purpose except pride. General's voice came out like gravel. It serves the purpose of maintaining order. If we let humanity refuse, every species will think they can refuse. We must make an example. The example we're making is that humans would rather die than submit. Is that really the lesson you want to teach the galaxy? Richards, the human, had been monitoring Council communications from a safe distance. He compiled a report and sent it back to Earth through encrypted channels. President Helen Carter read it in her office while Admiral Shaw attended via hologram. The Council is divided, the report concluded. Wants total war, wants quick submission. The other Council members are starting to question the cost. We have an opportunity here. Carter looked at Shaw. What's the military situation? We're losing every major engagement, but we're making them pay for it. Their casualty rates are higher than any war they've fought in 500 years. The troops are holding together barely. Can we keep this up? For a while, maybe 6 months. After that, we'll have lost too many ships and too many people. Shaw paused. But I'm hearing interesting reports from other species. They are protesting. They are complaining. 3 minor species have formally asked the Council to negotiate with us. Carter nodded slowly. So we're not just fighting a war, we're showing other species that resistance is possible. Exactly. Even if we lose, we win. Because we proved that you can tell the Council no and survive long enough to matter. Let's try to do better than just survive. Keep fighting. Make every battle cost them more than they want to pay, and let's see if we can find allies among the species who are tired of bowing. Back on the front lines, Admiral Shaw prepared for another engagement. His fleet had been reinforced with reserve ships, but they were older models, less advanced. It didn't matter. The crews were volunteers, every one of them, and they all knew what they were fighting for. A young captain contacted him before the battle. "Admiral, permission to speak freely." "Granted." "Sir, we all know we might not survive this. I just wanted to say it's an honor to serve." Shaw felt the weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. "Captain, if we don't survive this, Earth will remember what we did here. Every human will know that when the galaxy demanded tribute, we said no. That when they threatened us with death, we chose death over slavery. That's worth dying for." "Yes, sir, it is." The fleets engaged again. Ships exploded, people died, the war ground on. And across the galaxy, other species watched and wondered. If humans could say no, why couldn't they? The Galactic Council had wanted to make an example of humanity. They had succeeded, but not in the way they intended. The example being made was simple and terrifying. Humans don't break, they might bend. They might die, but they don't break. And that realization was beginning to crack the foundation of 10,000 years of galactic order. 3 weeks after the first battles, the war had settled into a pattern that nobody expected. Human forces lost every major engagement. Council forces won every tactical victory. And yet the military was bleeding resources faster than their economists had predicted possible. High Chancellor sat in his private chambers reviewing casualty reports that made his mandibles ache. 47 capital ships destroyed. 118 support vessels damaged or destroyed. Over 15,000 soldiers dead. Twice that number injured. And humanity kept fighting. General stood before the council, his scales from a boarding action where humans had nearly killed him. He delivered his report with controlled fury. "We control the space around 6 human colonies, but we cannot hold the colonies themselves. Human ground forces use tactics we've never encountered. They hide among civilian populations that should have evacuated but didn't. They strike from nowhere and disappear. Every garrison we establish loses soldiers daily to attacks we cannot predict or prevent." Coordinator Shem of the asked the question everyone was thinking. "General, how long until humanity surrenders?" "I don't know." The chamber fell silent. General had fought in 20 campaigns across 50 years. He had never before admitted uncertainty about victory. "The humans have a saying," continued. "They call it total war. It means every resource, every person, every moment dedicated to fighting. We've encountered warfare before, but always with limits. Civilians stay neutral. Industry continues operating. Life goes on around the edges of conflict. Humans don't fight that way. Every factory builds weapons. Every civilian supports the military. Every child old enough to understand knows they might have to fight." Ambassador of the spoke softly. "Because for them, this isn't just a war. It's a war for their right to exist as free beings. How do you negotiate with people who value freedom more than life itself?" Wanted to dismiss her words as telepathic nonsense, but he had seen the same pattern in every battle report. Human ships that should have retreated kept fighting. Human soldiers that should have surrendered died taking enemies with them. Human colonies that should have begged for mercy evacuated their children and prepared to resist. Across the galaxy, the effects of humanity's resistance spread like ripples in still water. Protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding their leadership explain why humans could refuse tribute, but could not. Ambassador watched from her office as the protests grew larger each day. Her daughter stood beside her, reading messages from other worlds. "It's not just us, Mother. They are protesting. They have stopped sending their monthly tribute shipment. 3 minor species have formally requested the Council renegotiate their terms." Felt something she had not felt in 40 years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe her people's submission had not been permanent after all. "What do you think will happen?" asked. "I don't know, but I know this. Humanity has done something no one thought possible. They've shown the galaxy that the Council can be resisted. Even if they lose, even if Earth burns, they've planted a seed that will grow." In the Council chamber, the emergency session continued. Processing Unit 3 of the presented its latest calculations with mechanical precision. Current projection models indicate complete subjugation of humanity will require 16 additional months of sustained military operations. Total cost: 2,800 capital ships, unknown personnel casualties, economic disruption estimated at 7.3 trillion credits. And if we withdraw? Coordinator Shem asked. Immediate costs are minimal. Long-term political costs are significant but manageable. However, withdrawal after sustained combat operations will be interpreted as defeat by many species. This interpretation may encourage further resistance among tributary populations. Felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. We cannot withdraw, we cannot be seen as weak. We cannot continue, the coordinator countered. My economic projections show that sustained war with humanity will require tribute increases from all tributary species. Some are already at maximum sustainable levels. Increasing demands will trigger more resistance, more protests, possibly more refusals. Then we increase military enforcement. With what forces? Every ship committed to fighting humans is a ship not available for maintaining order elsewhere. General has requested 6 additional battle fleets. I could request 20 fleets to suppress potential uprisings in tributary territories. The council dissolved into argument. The demanded total war, the demanded cost analysis, the called for negotiation, the presented probability calculations that satisfied nobody. Only one faction remained quiet. The Zone species said nothing, and their silence spoke volumes. After the council session, met privately with his senior advisors from the delegation. His chief aide delivered news that had been dreading. The merchant guilds have submitted a formal petition. They want the war ended immediately. The economic disruption is affecting trade routes, increasing insurance costs, and reducing profits across the sector. The merchant guilds can wait. Chancellor, the guilds control 70% of our species' economy. If they withdraw support, your position becomes untenable. Understood the implication. His own species was abandoning him. The tribute system had enriched for 10,000 years, but now it was costing too much. That same day, Ambassador requested a private meeting with Daniel Grant. The meeting was arranged through unofficial channels in a neutral space station far from military operations. Both ambassadors arrived with minimal security. Daniel looked tired. 3 weeks of war had aged him visibly, but his eyes still held the same certainty had sensed during their first meeting. Ambassador, I assume you're here to offer surrender terms. Actually, I'm here to discuss peace. Daniel raised an eyebrow. There's a difference. Yes, surrender means you accept our terms. Peace means we negotiate terms both sides can accept. The council told me tribute wasn't negotiable. The council is learning that many things we considered absolute are actually flexible. Sat across from Daniel, her telepathic senses carefully neutral. Ambassador Grant, I'm going to be honest with you in a way that may cost me my position. The council is fracturing. Half the members want to continue the war. Half want to find a way to end it. None of us expected humanity to fight like this. We told you we would. Words are easy. Actions are hard. You've proven through action that humanity means what it says. Now the council must decide if maintaining the tribute system is worth destroying the council itself. Daniel leaned forward. What are you proposing? I'm proposing nothing officially. I'm here as a private individual, not a council representative. But if I were to imagine a possible peace, what would it look like from humanity's perspective? No tribute, ever, full sovereignty for all human worlds, council military forces withdraw from human space, and immunity from future demands. That's asking for complete exemption from the system that governs the galaxy. Yes, felt the absolute certainty in his mind. No room for negotiation, no flexibility, no compromise. Just simple, absolute refusal to bend. If I could convince the council to accept those terms, what would humanity offer in return? Daniel considered the question carefully. We wouldn't actively support other species' rebellions. We wouldn't provide weapons or training to groups resisting council authority. We'd maintain peaceful trade relations and participate in cultural exchanges. We'd be neutral neighbors, not hostile enemies. But you wouldn't help us maintain order either. No, that's your problem to solve. If other species resist, they resist. If they accept tribute, they accept it. Humanity will neither encourage rebellion nor help suppress it. You realize that position itself encourages rebellion. Other species will see that humans achieved independence through resistance. Then maybe the Council should ask itself why so many species want to resist in the first place. Stood to leave. I'll present your position to the moderate faction. I cannot promise anything. General and the will never accept peace. High Chancellor's political survival depends on victory, but there are voices on the Council who are beginning to question whether this war serves anyone's interests. Ambassador, before you go, I have a question. Yes. Why are you doing this? Why risk your position to negotiate peace? Was silent for a long moment. Because I'm telepathic. I sense emotions, patterns, the shape of minds. For 10,000 years, I've sensed submission, fear, resentment, anger buried under layers of acceptance. The tributary species hate the system, but they accept it because they fear the alternative. She turned back to face Daniel. But when I sense human minds, I feel something different. I feel freedom. Real freedom, not the carefully controlled peace the Council offers. And I wonder what it would be like if the entire galaxy felt that way. The meeting ended. Both ambassadors returned to their respective governments with information that would shape the next phase of the conflict. On Earth, President Helen Carter met with her cabinet to discuss the peace overture. Admiral Shaw attended remotely, his flagship still on the front lines. Can we trust them? One cabinet member asked. Does it matter? Carter replied. We've proven our point. We've shown we won't submit. If they offer acceptable terms, we should take them. If they don't, we keep fighting. Admiral Shaw's voice came through the speakers. Madam President, I need to be honest about our military situation. We can fight for maybe 4 more months before we run out of ships and trained personnel. We're winning the moral victory, but we're losing the military one. Then we need to decide if 4 months is enough time to force a peace we can accept. That depends on the Council. If they're as divided as Ambassador suggests, we might not need 4 months. We might just need to survive long enough for them to tear themselves apart. In the Council chamber, the fractures became impossible to ignore. The formally proposed negotiations, the supported them, the calculated that peace was economically optimal. The sown species remained carefully neutral. Only the opposed peace. General stood before the Council and made his final argument. If we negotiate with humanity, we admit defeat. If we admit defeat, every tributary species will demand renegotiation. The system we've maintained for 10,000 years will collapse. Is that what you want? Chaos? Disorder? A galaxy where every minor species thinks they can refuse our authority? Ambassador responded with unusual force. General, the system is already collapsing. 4 tributary species have formally complained. 8 more are showing signs of unrest. They are on the verge of revolution. We can have an orderly transition to a new system, or we can watch the old system burn. Those are our only choices. The vote was called. It was the most important vote in Council history. Should they continue the war with humanity or seek peace? The voted for peace. The voted for peace. The abstained, which effectively meant peace. Though in a move that shocked everyone, voted for peace. Only the voted to continue the war. The motion passed. High Chancellor stared at the vote tally, watching 10,000 years of authority crumble before his eyes. His own species had abandoned him. The tribute system he had spent his career maintaining was finished. General left the chamber in fury, but even he recognized that the war was over. They would not fight alone against a united Council decision. The formal peace negotiations took 2 weeks. Daniel Grant represented humanity. Ambassador represented the moderate coalition. High Chancellor attended but said almost nothing, his political power already destroyed. The terms were simple. Humanity received full sovereignty. No tribute would ever be demanded. Council forces would withdraw from human space within 30 days. In exchange, humanity would remain neutral in Council affairs and maintain peaceful trade relations. The treaty was signed on a neutral station with representatives from 50 species watching. When Daniel placed his signature on the document, he felt the weight of 3 weeks of war lift from his shoulders. President Carter addressed Earth's population that evening. Her message was broadcast across every human world, every colony, every station. Today, humanity achieved something extraordinary, not through superior technology, not through overwhelming force, but through absolute refusal to surrender our freedom. We lost ships, we lost people, We lost friends and family and comrades, but we did not lose ourselves. We remained free. She paused, and her voice grew stronger. Let me be clear about what we've accomplished. We did not win a war. We won something more important. We won the right to say no, the right to determine our own future, the right to be citizens, not subjects, and that right cost us dearly, but it was worth every price we paid. The ambassador watched Carter's speech with tears streaming down her face. Around her, crowds gathered in the streets celebrating something that hadn't happened yet but would soon. Within 6 months, the formally renegotiated their tribute down to voluntary trade agreements. They achieved similar terms. 4 other species followed. The tribute system didn't end overnight, but it began transforming into something different, something that looked more like partnership than subjugation. High Chancellor retired in disgrace. General remained in command of forces but never spoke of the human war again. Ambassador became the new council chair, leading a reformation that would take decades but had already begun. Daniel Grant returned to Earth a hero. He declined offers of higher office and instead took a teaching position at the Diplomatic Academy. When students asked him about the tribute crisis, he always gave the same answer. The council asked us to choose between submission and death. They assumed we'd choose submission because that's what every species had chosen before. They were wrong. Humans chose death, and because we chose death, we earned life, real life as free beings making our own choices. Admiral Shaw rebuilt Earth's military into a defensive force that would never again be caught unprepared. Commander Barnes trained the next generation of officers, teaching them that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to lose. Richards published his research on the tribute system's collapse, and it became required reading in every diplomatic program across the galaxy. The lesson was clear. Systems based on force and fear could last but they remained vulnerable to one simple word. No. 5 years after the war, Daniel stood in the memorial garden on Earth, looking at the names of everyone who had died defending humanity's freedom. 3,000 names carved into stone, representing 3,000 people who chose death over submission. A young woman approached him, wearing a student uniform from the Diplomatic Academy. Ambassador Grant, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask a question. Go ahead. In class, we studied the tribute crisis. I understand why humanity refused, but I don't understand why you delivered the message in person. You could have transmitted Earth's response remotely. Why risk yourself? Daniel looked at the memorial at all those names. Because words mean more when you're willing to die for them. The council needed to see that a human could stand in front of them, knowing he might be killed and still say no. It wasn't bravery. It was necessity. Someone had to show them that humans don't just talk about freedom, we live it. And if they had killed you, then I would have died free and someone else would have continued the fight. He turned to face the student. That's the lesson humanity taught the galaxy. You can kill us. You can destroy our ships and burn our colonies, but you cannot make us submit, ever, because for humans, freedom isn't negotiable. It's not something we'll trade for safety or comfort or survival. It's what makes us human. The student nodded slowly, understanding. Thank you, Ambassador. As she walked away, Daniel returned his attention to the memorial. 3,000 names, 3,000 prices paid for one simple word. It had been worth it. Across the galaxy, the new order continued taking shape. Not perfect, not ideal, but better than what had come before. More species had autonomy, more voices were heard, more choices were available. And in every council chamber, on every station, in every negotiation, everyone remembered the lesson humanity taught. Some words are worth dying for. Some principles are non-negotiable. And when someone tells you that submission is your only choice, sometimes the right response is just one word. No.